Good afternoon, everyone. Assume you can hear me. My name is Steve Merksamer, and I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the Public Policy Institute of California, and I'm also delighted to be here today representing our board. We're pleased to present this program featuring Congressman Kevin McCarthy. This event is part of PPIC's 2012 Speaker Series on California's future. I would like to thank the sponsors of this series for their underwriting support. The S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation, the James Irvine Foundation, the Pacific Life Foundation, Southern California Edison, Union Bank, and knowledge partner McKinsey & Company. The series is also funded by contributions of unrestricted support to PPIC's donor circle, which all of you, of course, are free to participate in, should you so choose. A couple of housekeeping issues. First, please silence your cell phones. And second, you should have received an evaluation survey in your packet of materials. Please fill this out and drop it off at the registration table at the end of the event. Now on to the program. Congressman McCarthy will join PPIC President Mark Baldassare for a discussion about some of the critical issues facing our state and our nation, from promoting economic growth to managing the budget to creating sustainable water policies. Congressman Kevin McCarthy represents the 22nd District of California in the U.S. House of Representatives, and he is a fourth-generation Kern County resident. First elected to Congress in 2006, he was elected Majority Whip by the Republican Conference in 2010, which makes him, I believe, the number 3 in the House leadership and certainly the highest-ranking Republican elected official in California today. As many of you know, Congressman McCarthy is no stranger to Sacramento or to state policy. From 2002 to 2006, he represented the 32nd Assembly District in the California legislature. As a freshman legislator, he was selected unanimously by his Republican colleagues to serve as the Assembly Republican leader, becoming the first freshman legislator and the first legislator from Kern County to assume that post. So welcome back, Congressman McCarthy, and welcome, Mark. We look forward to your conversation today. Thank you.
How are you, Ken? Good to see you.
Well, Kevin, welcome. It's nice to have you here today. I thought that the timing is just really superb to have you here giving your perspective on California and national events at the beginning of the year, the first in our speaker series. And this is going to be a lot like when I come to visit you in Washington. Only 300 of our closest friends will be listening in on the conversation. Let me just say that this is, I believe, the largest lunchtime audience PPIC has ever had for any of our events. So I think it speaks to how eager we all are to hear about what's going on in Washington and your perspective on California. And the cost of lunch, right. Let's start out, as we had discussed, by talking about the economy, because that's what Californians in our polls have consistently said they're most concerned about and continue to be concerned about in this year. From your perspective, what can the federal government do in 2012 to help ensure that there's economic growth and that we create more jobs in this country?
The greatest ability for growth, we have to reform America's tax system. And I was just having a conversation. I think where we are in the world today is kind of about the same place we were in 1980. I mean, think of the challenges we have and think of the challenges of what we had in 1980. In 1980, we were worried about Japan's economy surpassing America. Today, we're worried about China and India. We had a problem in the Middle East. We were held hostage. There was high gasoline prices. We're worried about the Strait being shut down with Iran one more time. We're worried about where the price of fuel is going. We had a challenge when it came, one thing we didn't have then, we had inflation. But for the first time in 1980, when you asked America the question, will the next generation be better off than the generation before it? For the first time it hit 50%. Today it's at an all-time high. And you wondered with the best days of America behind it. Now what happened in 1980? Japan did not surpass us. We unshackled what held us back. We reformed our tax code. But there was different than 1980 today. The dollar was the world economy. It was the world currency. There was no challenge to it. We were not in two different wars. There were two Berlins. The Soviet Union, China was not opened up. Well, what happened from 1980 to today, we went to a world economy. But we have never changed our tax system to let us compete worldwide. We will not get out of these doldrums until we allow ourselves to compete. And the most interesting thing, as I travel the state, I was up in Northern California. I was speaking at a high school, and this one student asked me about the failure of the free market to the success of the communist China. And I asked him from the standpoint, because I tried to explain to him, we've got to realize we didn't get into this problem overnight. I mean, if you really look from the Great Society forward, we incrementally have gotten here, right? Because we avoided some of the bigger challenges that we had. And I asked this student, did he play a sport? And he was a swimmer. And I said, okay, let me put it in a perspective maybe you'd understand. It's like after World War II, America's a swimmer and we're competing with every other country. We dive in the pool, not only do we win, we're out of the pool and we're dried off before anybody comes in second and third. So along the way, we told America to put on a 10-pound weight. We still won. We put on a 50-pound weight, we still won. We put on a 100-pound weight, we still won, but pretty soon second and third came along. Today we have like a 300-pound body weight, and we're not able to win. Nobody says take the weight belt off. We just say we don't swim like we used to. So if we really want to get out of this mess, don't play the perspective that we put both parties into the box, that we go to the philosophical position that we say you have to give here, you have to give there, or you're not going to get there. What I really like, I like competition. When I was growing up, I used to go to McDonald's. You ever go to McDonald's when you were young and get the scratch-off game? So it was during the Olympics, so if the American won the 100-yard dash, you got some free fries or something like that, right? In the Olympics, everybody starts at the same starting line and finishes at the same finishing line. Today, we start behind. So why don't we take everybody that we compete with and say we're going to do this? We're going to make sure that America doesn't have, one, an advantage, but we don't have a disadvantage. We're going to start a level playing field. So we're going to take the average of what all the other countries are. So our tax system, you're not going to be punished if you have a corporation in America and your product gets shipped over to Europe and you're paying for their social welfare, but you're also paying for ours and your prices are higher. It's not going to take you 2 years to build a factory here if it's 6 months in China. It's not going to take you 7 years to bring a new drug to market and 4 years in Europe, because what's going to happen is people are going to leave. Now, I didn't tell you what you had to change. I started the starting point. You found what you had to keep us safe. But let's take a percentage where we're at least get the same level playing field. That's why I think 2012 is either going to be the mark of the great American comeback or a slow fade into history. I don't say that based upon which party wins. I say that based upon the difference in 1980, we had somebody that became a leader. This country is so hungry for leadership. You might send us in the wrong direction, but someone just needs to lead. And I think that's what we're craving.
Thank you. So related to the tax issue, I wonder if you could take us through what the end result is of all the federal budget discussions in 2011 that were related to spending and taxes and debt ceiling and debt reduction and give us your perspective on what we might expect from 2012 in terms of actions around the federal budget, because this is related to your
Okay, to be very frank, if I took what happened in 2011 and I applied to 2012 when it's an election year, it's only going to be worse, okay? That's straight honesty with you. But the thing that hurts me the most that I think that America failed at is normally in divided government, we achieve big things. Think for one moment and sit back and think, and it doesn't matter who's in power on which power, but when you're divided, you have to come together. Okay, Ronald Reagan is president of the United States. It's 1980. Inflation is high. Unemployment is high. You're wondering whether the best days are behind you. You have Ross Stenkowski. No one would challenge him on his ability as a legislator or who he believes in his philosophical beliefs as a Democrat from Chicago, was chairman of Ways and Means. And committee chairmen are all powerful. Tip O'Neill is speaker. No one would ever challenge him based upon he comes from Boston. We don't even have one Republican elected to Congress in Massachusetts, okay? What happened? They reformed the tax code and divided government. Bill Clinton is president. Who does he have as leader? He has Newt Gingrich and Bob Dole. Two people that end up wanting to be nominees for president, right? They're not afraid of where their party's at. They balance the budget, they have a surplus, and reform welfare. But if you walked yourself through the articles at the time of when it took place, it looked kind of ugly, right? Government was being shut down, vetoed welfare reform 3 times before he signed it. But it turned out to be something good. 2011 should have been that year. And I go back to the leadership question. Yeah, I may be Republican, and I'm very solid in my philosophical beliefs, but I come from a family of all Democrats. The thing this country is lacking is leadership. And I might be a little simplistic in my views, maybe because I'm from Bakersfield, but you can sum up leaders of presidents in 2 ways, and this is my view, right? You're either a thermostat or you're a thermometer. What does a thermometer do? A thermometer can only tell you one thing, the temperature. All right? I believe our current president is that. He tells you something, the temperature of this room. Everybody in this room knows what the temperature is, but he says it in a different manner, so he gets to be leader, but there's no other skill set, and he's not going to change the temperature. A thermostat is a Ronald Reagan, a Bill Clinton, a Winston Churchill. It's 100 degrees in this room. But if you all follow me, I'll get you to 72. Now, that means you're going to have to do things that you're not comfortable with. And after you do that, you're going to be 98. You're still going to be sweating. I'm going to ask you to come back to do something else. You're going to be 96. But if you follow it, you will get there. And that's where we need to go. We had a unique opportunity. Okay? We had Republicans take the majority in the House. The Democrats still had the Senate. And the president was in a year before he was up for re-election. All right? Now, this was the same thing that Bill Clinton had, right? Because Bill Clinton lost the majority as president. And I'm the first one to tell you as a Republican, we did not win the majority, the Democrats lost it, okay? The American public decided that their policies were wrong. They looked at us and said, we weren't crazy, I'll give you an opportunity. They voted against their policies. Now, what were those policies? Those policies were based upon the president as well. So it was his time to pivot. He should have pivoted after Scott Brown. He should have pivoted after New Jersey and Virginia's governor's races. He should have pivoted after the House. He never changed. You had a debt ceiling debate, and you had a budget debate. Now, how do I think the budget's ever going to change? The House produced a budget. We went places that no one thought we could go. We dealt with issues that politically people say you shouldn't do done. The Senate has not produced a budget in 3 years. I sent a little letter to McConnell. If you put it in realistic terms, Kim Kardashian could be married almost 12 times and divorced, and they still have not produced a budget. But how do you get out of it and you have $1 trillion deficit if you don't produce a budget? So this was a time where you had parties in both positions where you could have come together. And if both parties could have come together and done something about the challenge we face, our biggest challenge, or what we're going to call Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid. Because if we do nothing, they'll end up taking every dollar we come into. What did we do in Congress so far? We've actually decreased discretionary spending year over year. Now, you think that's a big deal? That's only happened once outside of World War II. It happened in the 90s. We did it, but that's too small of a pie. If we got rid of all discretionary spending, military, everything else, we'd still have a deficit. So if you don't tackle these growth, and I'm not saying maybe our ideas aren't the ideas you want, but produce an idea. At least put it on the table. This was the time that if both parties gave a little and did something on that, it wouldn't be a political issue at the end of the election next time because everybody came together. That was the last time they did something on Social Security. They just moved the age. So how are you going to do it in 2012 in an election year? I think it's a little difficult. And this president is running a different campaign. He's taking a mode out of, I think, he was trying to do a little Gray Davis and he's trying to do Truman. Truman ran against Congress. That can work. People dislike us. But there comes a point where it's mano a mano, whoever your nominee is. And I don't believe at the end of the day, Americans elect just by being negative. You know? Think about it. Reagan took us to the shiny city on the hill. Clinton, it was about the economy, stupid. Current president, yes, we can. You're not going to do it by just demonizing the other person because the policies are there. I think we have to have that policy debate. Now, I'm hopeful that based upon what we did with our budget, based upon the discussion of what we had, that we can continue that discussion. I thought there was a point where we could have had corporate tax reform. I really did. Because we're at a disadvantage competing everywhere else. You had Geithner say some comments. You had the president say some comments. But the so-called super committee, no one could ever get there because people were too afraid to go a place they're uncomfortable with. And if you're running against something, you can't reform it.
So how should our state government, which is facing a budget deficit this year, how should our state government leaders be thinking about the federal funding portion of meeting states' budget needs? And what's your advice, having been here and now they're coming back, as to how California should deal with its budget situation?
Great question. And
two-part question.
okay. How should the state think about how they're going to get money from the federal government? They shouldn't look for it. Look within, all right? Don't think, we're borrowing 40 cents out of every dollar. So you want to go tell China to, and you have twofold when we're from California. We have everybody against California, and then you also have the belief is, do you reward bad behavior? I mean, if you take America and you put a map and you put the color coding, if you take the middle America from North Dakota down, they're doing well financially, and a lot of that happens to do with energy. They're actually giving tax cuts in North Dakota and others. Well, why do you reward bad behavior of other states? You'll never change your behavior, right? So I don't think you're going to see people rushing to it, and we have too large of a deficit to think you're going to get a lot more. I had this discussion with the governor a year ago. I came up and I went to see the governor. He just gave his State of the State. And he laid out a budget, and I said, look, I don't have a dog in the fight, but I'll tell you from my perspective, being former leader, if you want to produce a budget, you're a new governor, I'll give you my advice on the outside, right? Kind of a macro level. Why do you produce a budget that's designed to say, I'm just going to go pick off six Republicans and I'm going to get a budget passed? What does that change? I said, where Republicans are, we're so far in the hole. And if you're just going to make it about taxes, we could just sit in that foxhole all day and never get there. But it doesn't change anything about California. Why didn't you craft a budget that said, I'm going to get 20 Republicans to vote for this? Then it had to be some good. And you know what? You're going to lose some Democrats. That's finding some place in the common ground. Now I watch this latest proposal. And really from a macro level, just reading about it, I think he crafted something, to me, looks a little backwards. And take it from my perspective, right? It looks like he decided how big a government he wanted. I'm going to grow at 7%. Then I got to go take this much money to fund the government I want. Now, I would look at it from a different perspective. How large of economy do I want first? And I'd craft a budget about how do I create this economy. Then I'd figure out how much money I had left over for how much government I could have. I wouldn't have started the other way around. And it almost seems from a sense, from an outside person, that you craft a budget based on trying to influence, force people to vote a certain way on initiative coming forward. I'm going to punish you. And I never think punishment works. I think rewarding good behavior works better. So I think from looking on the outside, you're going to be back into the same hole you were before. And I don't want to start a second decade of decline in California. We're too great of a state to have that. So first think of this. What economy do we want in California? Don't worry about what government is. And start crafting what creates the size of that economy. Then you could come back and say, what do I have to support that? And you could add that in. This state is prepared to make tough decisions. But I'm tired of turning on the news and watching a guy that had moved here because of the prosperity of California, and now he's moving back to Texas. That doesn't look good for the long run. So if you think you can get out of this overnight, you can. But you're not going to get out of it if you just keep crafting a budget based upon the size of government you want with never discussing what size of economy you want.
Thank you. So part of having a great economy in California historically has been, and having economic growth has historically been having an adequate water supply.
Yes.
And certainly from, not just in your part of the state, this part of the state that you represent, but for everybody in California, making sure that we've got an adequate, good quality water, very important, and not an easy task. Involves federal, state, coastal, inland, north-south issues. What do you think is the way forward to make sure that California has an adequate water supply as part of our effort to build a great economy?
This is my prediction today. Water will become the issue before the end of the year. You can pull it right now and it won't show up very well. You pull it 6 months from now, it will. We were in a dry year. We had a wet year, and we did not do what was needed to prepare ourselves. All right? So you have to take, and water you cannot fix overnight. So you have to take a short-term and a long-term approach. And California is a big state, right? So short-term, you've got to make sure the Delta can pump. All right? You've got to do what happens that Delta can pump. And the number one thing, the biggest problem in Washington is uncertainty. And the more uncertainty you create, just like on this budget, the more problems you're going to have. Uncertainty when it comes to water. You've got to have some long-term approach. You know, we've been battling for years, and we're always going to battle, but this is really the issue of the century. Most of the water comes from the north, population's in the south. How do you protect the north, but taking away the uncertainty in some way of a conveyance to get to the south? I believe we can get there. Now the difficulty, some of the toughest times I ever had as leader, the philosophical divides were greater when it came to water than when it came to an abortion discussion or others. I mean, it's a tough discussion. But when they turn the spigot off, you can't build a new road. I mean, this is a fundamental question. Now I know the first approach is a political approach I hear now. We have a water bond up, so the governor wants it off because he's afraid his won't get up because it's a political decision about how people would vote. I trust voters. If you open it up, it takes a 2/3. If you open it up, I don't know that anything's coming back. Is that really a smart decision? I think from a perspective, short-term, long-term, certainty is number one. You take ability to pump in the Delta. You find a way that you get conveyance with protections up north, and then you create the ability. And I come from Kern. We've been very good about storage. You create the incentive for more storage. And you can fight in many different ways. Is that above? Is that below? Is that a combination thereof? But you create the incentive to do it. Because we are living off a system, not just a water system, but a highway system and a university system. Not that Jerry Brown was in office, his father was in office at the time. And we have grown too large to deal with it. And if we avoid the issue too long, you won't be able to turn it around, and there'll be a bigger exit than you've seen before.
Let's talk about another aspect of infrastructure as it relates to growing the economy. You mentioned all of these great infrastructure projects that are decades old. And certainly California's transportation system was an important part of our historic success, you know, the growth that we had in the 60s and afterwards. So where does a high-speed rail fit in terms of California's future economic growth, in your opinion?
I just think it's wrong that we do the high-speed rail right now. We can't afford it. And I think California is looking like, give us the adult supervision that we want to keep having the candy, but someone finally cut us off. I mean, it's like, look, during the housing boom, I still live in my very first house. All my friends went out, got the others, right? Mine's on a 15-year loan. My son's a senior, about ready to go to college. I'm in a little better position to be able to pay for it because I saved. This is like having enough money to pour the foundation of your house and hope the rest comes to build it. How many houses do you see just sitting out there? If you look at the PER review, you look at the ridership, it just doesn't make sense. And then fundamentally, we have a deficit. How are you going to fund the bonds to go through it? This is really a quest. And I come from Bakersfield where you're going to try to start to build it. I think there's legal questions. If you read the Purr review, there's big legal questions where you first build it, because it's not the high-speed rail you dream of. The cost analysis, if you look at what light rail costs, they take that average for high-speed. Well, that's not the case for high-speed rail. And think of this. You're going from the Bay Area to Anaheim. All those people from San Diego up, that's a big population. Not going. But you say twice as many people that ride all of Amtrak is going to ride this? Do you realize we subsidize every first-class ticket on Amtrak? So now we're going to say, okay, we're going to build this because we think it's the best need. You're going to subsidize people who go on there, so what are you going to cut in education and everywhere else to subsidize somebody a ticket on it? And I think it's disingenuous for Californians who crafted it, and you put it before the voters and the voters voted for it. You gave them a pamphlet and you told them what it would cost, what it would entail, and when it would be built. Well, there's no one in the room that doesn't disagree that that has all changed. Well, why don't you go back to the voters? Don't you owe it to them? Because what you told them before you built anything is different. Shouldn't you go back to them and say, you know what, it's different. Do you still want it? Our economy is different at the same time. Now, you think the federal government's just going to pay for all this? That's not true. Because that's not going to happen. We're borrowing the money. We can't do it. And if you said there was going to be $11 billion of private money in here, and there's no money in there, and you're not going to give the private entities the desire of, or the say of where it's going to be built or how it's going to go, but you think they're going to take over and take the money, they're not going to come. No one's going to manage it that way. You know, in my district, there's a little place called Mojave. And you've only driven through it. No one's ever stayed there. It's between Edwards Air Force Base and China Lake, and it's this little airport, right? And the only time you've gone through it, you go out there, oh, is that airport that has those planes that just sit there? Yeah, that's the airplane that has planes. And you know why planes sit there? It's when the economy's bad. You only pay $500 a month. You sit there because it's in the desert. It doesn't hurt them. You just put up the engines, and then you can take back off when the economy gets better. But you know that little airport is more than 100% occupied? Do you know Richard Branson has put in $250 million? Do you know Paul Allen just pledged another $250 million inside Mojave? Now, why do you go there? Because they believe they're going to go to space. Now, they didn't go with NASA. They didn't go with anybody else. They're going to do it privately. No one's saying they're going to do that with high-speed rail. They're vesting their own money by capability. This is the number one thing I think. Okay, I go back and forth each week from Washington, so I read a lot, more than I ever read in school. But I always give recommended reading. So one of my jobs last term was recruiting candidates. And when I went and recruited candidates, I gave them a number of different books. I'd give them The World is Flat. I'd give them different philosophical books, but I gave them a book called Moneyball. Any of you ever read the book Moneyball?
Oh, yeah,
all right.
For sure.
Okay, I didn't think a lot of them read it either, so then I rented a theater and I took them to see the movie, too, when they became members. But this is what I think is lacking in government, accountability. Now, what's Moneyball about? The Oakland A's and Billy Beane. Now, Billy Beane was a good high school baseball player, so good he could be the #1 pick or he could get a full ride to Stanford. I think if he looks back on it, he probably wanted to take the full ride to Stanford. But he went to the pros. Had a okay time, not really good. But then he became the general manager of the Oakland A's. Okay? Well, that's like being in AAA ball, right? But he's judged the same way the general manager of the Boston Red Sox, New York Yankees. But the New York Yankees get $130 million, he gets $30 million, and they have to compete the same way. Well, he realizes he can't compete the same way. So I make this recommended reading to you, to anybody. All right? I don't care what business you're in. Why? Because you need to think differently. What we find is we start thinking the same way everybody else because that's the way our industry has thought. That's the way we've done it in the past. Well, you know what? That's not where the world is at. So what Billy Beane did was he's going to have to think differently. Normal baseball teams sit around, they have all these scouts, right? Somebody's up for a draft. They're both the same age. They both right-handed, the same batting average. And they say, who do you want to draft? Well, you first ask Billy Beane, how do you win a game? He says, I score more runs than my opponent. Not that I get more home runs, not that I have more perfect games. I score more runs than my opponent. So he wants to measure everything. Well, he goes around the room and you say, well, draft this guy because he looks more like a baseball player. You say pick the other guy because, you know what, he's got a better looking girlfriend, he's got more confidence. That's how they pick, right? And Billy Beane says, no. When do they hit the ball on average? Well, no one had ever measured that. Well, this guy hits every third pitch, this guy hits every fifth pitch. Who's better? The guy that hits every fifth pitch because he wore 2 more pitches out of his opponent. Now, no one had ever asked that question or measured that. But Billy Beane started asking it. Why? Because he wants to score more runs than his opponent. What if we applied that to government? What if we said a new program came up? What was the goal of the program? Did we achieve it? What you want to fund right now, does it work to make the achievement? And if we started measuring things, and what I want to do, I want to apply Moneyball to high-speed rail. Because I believe this way. Voters lend me power every 2 years. And they expect me to spend my time looking at all the things that they can't. And it's their money, so should I invest their money in this? Well, I don't see the return on it. And if you want to argue the other side, well, what about all the other infrastructures? Well, you know what? When it comes to aviation and when it comes to highways, you know what? The user pays some of that too. I don't see the user paying anything in high-speed rail. So if I measure this, this does not pan out. And if I took it to the next level, well, I took it to your house, and I said, you have this money, would you make this investment? I don't think you'd say yes either. So it's really that adult moment that it'd be a nice thing to have. It'd be a good, shiny train, and no one would ride it, but we're still paying for it. Then don't make the decision. Make the decision that, yes, we're going to take the leadership. Where we currently stand in California, we're not going to make this investment. I think water is very important, and that makes sure people have to drink that. I think the investment, if you're worried about the federal money, I've crafted a bill that gives you the freedom to spend the money on some other transportation product. Yeah, put another lane on Highway 99. Do something that makes your transportation better.
Thank you. So speaking of recruiting candidates, let me get your take on the, how the presidential primary season is going so far, and how do you see the House races ending up in 2012? Which I'm sure is something you're very involved in too.
Well, hi, Kacho. We have had a unique time where I believe historically when we look back, you're going to take the last 3 elections as wave elections. But I think that wave is now gone out to sea. Because take for instance, I came in 06, right? Smallest Republican class. They wanted change. They got some change. In 08, government, they said they wanted government to be a little bigger, right? We were having the meltdown and others, and Obama, yes, we can. In 2010, the electorate then said, that's too much government. That wasn't what I was asking for. So I really think what 2012 is going to be about, the size and scope of what we want America to be. And I personally believe we need to have that fight. Now, when I was growing up, hard for you to believe, but I was kind of a smart aleck. And any fight I ever got in on the playground that someone broke up too soon, I had to fight again, right? Because no one decided who won. We can't let this fight just linger. I want to engage in it. I think it's healthy for America. If you look, it's been growing, right? You had Ross Perot, you had the movement of the Tea Party, you've had this Occupy. They have a difference of opinion. We are lingering in a malaise, and if we continue to linger in a malaise, it's going to go so far, your options, you're not going to come out of it, right? So have the debate and have it very clear and crisp. Now, I actually believe, from my philosophical position, I'm in a party that believes in limited government and greater individual opportunity. I believe this president is very strong in his philosophical beliefs. I'll tell you a little personal story. Right after I got elected whip, the president called up and he wanted to have lunch with Boehner, Cantor, and myself, right? So I go down to the White House and we go to this little room outside the Oval Office. And you know the first thing I think? I want to go back to my teachers because no one thought I could be in this room at this time, right? So we have this little table, the door's open, you can see the Oval Office, and the president, he sits here, and Boehner sits here, Cantor sits here. I get the short straw, I'm next to Biden, right? So we're down here. And there's no cameras, there's no teleprompters, and we're just having a discussion, right? He's never had any need to get to know us, he's been in power 2 years, we've now become The majority, we really don't have a working relation. This is an opportunity to build some relationship, right? The founders divided. So we have a very frank discussion. And I'm a simplistic guy, and I try to look at people from the experience of where they come, right? Because I believe when you get a certain age in life, your philosophical beliefs become based upon your life experiences, right? At 19, I got lucky, I won the lottery, I invested it, I created my first small business, I sold it to pay my way through college, I applied for a summer internship program with a congressman, he turned me down. I'm now elected to a position I can't get an internship for. I mean, I created a couple other small businesses. So my experience comes there. And I start having this discussion with the president on the things that he wants to do. And I really start looking at his life experience, and none of them are bad, right? He was a state senator, he was a community organizer, he was involved with the labor union, he was an attorney. But there is a thread that goes through all those occupations, all good occupations, but all those occupations redistribute wealth. So he looks at wealth in a different manner than I look at wealth. I look at it from a wealth creation point. And I really come to the perspective that we both think the world and the economy is this big. Now this is where our life experience is different. He thinks it's this big, but he believes that the world's unfair, so he has to change the slices of the pie, and that's his job. I believe it's this big, but I think you need to grow it bigger so people can have bigger slices. And that's the philosophical debate in a big nutshell of what we're having. Either you want to become that democratic European-esque country, or you want a different, more limited one. We've been building up to this battle, and I think that's what 2012 is going to be about. So it's not so much about personalities, it is about what form and size and scope of government you want. Now, I'm not 100% sure my philosophy wins, but I believe my philosophy is right. And I think it's worth fighting for. And I see people every day that believe the other way. Well, let's take that debate to American public and have it and be solved with it.
Thank you.
Was that anywhere in your question?
More or less. So we've got about 10 more minutes. Should we take some questions from the
Sure.
audience? Let's do it.
First hand up.
And we're looking for questions and not statements. So just...
Well, first, he's talking about, one, the bailout, and second, the Fed Reserve. I didn't vote for the bailout because I didn't think it's the right thing to do because it rewarded bad behavior. But when you look at what the Federal Reserve did without the American public even knowing, is even further. This is a fundamental discussion that everybody's having. When you asked my question earlier about should the federal government get California money, you're rewarding bad behavior. I just saw them reward bad behavior. Now, financially, we're in a mess. I'm a person that believes in greater transparency. Now, you can all do this. If you care about your government and you want to know what's happening in Washington, there's an app for that. If you have an iPhone, a BlackBerry, a Droid, go to your store, whatever your app store is on there, and put in Whipcast. Download it. What we created there is you'll get to know exactly what's coming to the floor, when it's happening just as fast as members get it, and the background, the philosophy behind it. The Fed has worked in secrecy for so long, and it's an economy among itself to move. It was created on a basis of need. I think the greatest thing for the feds is to have greater transparency. And I don't mean transparency to show me 6 months after you did some action. If the action's worth doing, I think the American public can get there, and at least those elected who the public has loaned money to can see it as well. I don't like this secrecy stuff of where it happens. That's why I'm big into auditing the Fed as well. Greater transparency in government saves us. It makes them not to do dumb things.
Another question out there. Yes?
Where are you relative to the issue of transparency and campaign finance reform in Citizens United?
I like campaign finance reform. Look, if I was king for a day, I'd make every race competitive, and I'd say majority of your money has to come from your own district. But you know also what I'd do? Don't put limits on it. Make people report. Make people make their own opinion. Because what I have found is, it's not the parties that have the money, and it's not the party that has the political operation. It's those that have greater to gain. They spend more, and they do it inside a primary in the last couple weeks. So I'm more for opening things up. I'm more for empowering the constituent. So I had to take $1, be able to receive $1 from my constituent before I could take $1 from the outside. I'm all for that. Why? Because it empowers you more. I'm for greater reporting. Report every 48 hours, every dollar you get. But I think lines are the greatest part of doing it. Look, I come from a person that recruited a lot of candidates. We had less money, and we won the majority. What you have to have is the right message, enough money to get your message out, and to be able to win.
Thank you. Some other questions? I've got a few questions for you if no one else does. Oh, here's one.
You briefly touched on the endowment program. Can you offer some specifics? One of the things I worry about, excuse me, there are no options for somebody who's in their mid-50s for Medicare. So what are we going to go as we go down the road? We're set up for that.
You know, the greatest thing here is there's got to be the end to the gimmicks, the tricks, and the lies. Who in here thinks Social Security and Medicare is going to be for them if they're 50 or younger? Every actuary says it's not. So why don't we make sure that it is? So you can't continue down the same form. I mean, when Social Security was developed, life expectancy was 63, so you had to beat the Green Reaper to get there. It was 40 to 1. The fastest growing population in America today is over 100. So if you just raise the age, you know, 1 year every 2 months or something like that, are the 5-year-olds really going to get that upset that it's still there for them? Pay a little more? We offered in our budget reform. So we said, from the standpoint, if you're 50 or younger, how old are you? 56. All right, nothing would change for you. You'd have the current system. If you're 50 or younger, we're going to guarantee you still have it. But how we're going to do that? We're going to change it. And I think we should think differently like this. This is where the money ball comes in, right? So we apply, you'd get the health care just as every member of Congress, right? You get to choose. You go through, and there's a set amount. You decide where you're going. So you use the private-public to kind of control costs. I mean, there's two forms right now. The president believes that he appoints a commission of 13, and they're just going to tighten the screws, right? So there's no more money, you just tighten it down. Others believe we use innovation, we use the combination to control the cost. I believe we also have to use the third. The third is much different. Why did Lindbergh go across the Atlantic? There was a prize, right? What are the greatest costs in healthcare? A lot of different ways, how you practice medicine, defensive medicine, others. What if we created prizes? What if we said if you cured a form of cancer or heart disease, you won this big pot? You may never even get there, but would you direct a whole industry to start doing that and be rewarded for good behavior? Why don't you do the combination of it? I mean, we have to control the cost. On average, government will bring in 18% of GDP. A couple decades, 18% of GDP will take every dollar in just those three entities. So you do not have a defense. What's happening? Look, every great society has collapsed mainly based upon finances, right? Rome, you overextend, you create a military to go to try to conquer. But we are different than any society that's ever been like us. Why? I mean, I was in Israel this summer. I took 30 freshmen with me, right? And we were with Shimon Peres. He speaks very softly, right? But he says, there's been no country like yours. Because it's not what you take, it's always what you've given. You've never gone to conquer somebody, you rebuild them. Well, that's different, that you would risk your lives to give somebody else freedom. Well, there's been no one like us, right? But what's the thing you just heard with the president this week? He needs to start cutting back on defense. Not from a standpoint that we're in a different, safer world, but from a standpoint we can't afford it. Well, those are early signs of warnings. Then you've got a sign of these programs of not being able to sustain itself. You've got a person who's 56 years old who believes it's not going to be there for him in 10 years from now. Which is the speed of it's going? No, it won't be. So the longer you wait, the fewer options you have. And if I'm given an ability where I'm getting greater choice, and I'm going through, and I'm getting rewarded for better behavior, I'm going to control certain costs. But I'm also going to start learning what the costs are. I mean, I walk into a restaurant in Bakersfield, and when I walk in it, before I walk in it, I know how clean it is, A, B, C, or D. Made easy for me, right? I know A is better than B. I know I really don't want to walk in one with a C. Okay? I open up a menu. I know if I ordered a la carte or not, I know what it costs me. But if I go to my doctor, I don't know. He has no scoring out there, or she. They don't give me a menu when they ask me that I've got to do some procedure. When are we going to start empowering the individual? We created a system based upon insurance companies, based upon where you work. Well, you know what? You don't work at the same place for 40 years anymore. So it's got to be portable. You don't supply healthcare the same way you did in the past. And we have different knowledge. We're able to find things out sooner. So I think there's a different way of going about doing it where you stop the lies, and yeah, it can be there for you. And I'm going to be very upfront. It's not going to be the same system as it is today. But we're going to make sure it's there for you, and we're going to allow you greater choice in it.
Time for one more question, then I have one more question for you. Yes, all the way back there.
Can you give us your own analysis of the immigration issue and also look in your crystal ball and tell us what the federal government may do about it in the next 4 to 8 years?
I think in the next year they probably won't do a lot about it. I think the president will start playing it up purely for a basis for an argument. But I think it's getting to a point where we realize something has to happen. And it's just like a budget or tax issue. You cannot demonize it from the perspective of where you come. Now, I believe in things and principles. I believe the core of this country, one of the greatest strengths we have, is the rule of law. Even during a financial meltdown, people are still wanting to put their money in America. But if you develop a whole society that breaks the rule of law, you break down the rule of law. But if people come here because the system doesn't work, you've got to solve the system. So I think from you take a perspective, and maybe this is something we could have solved in divided government, but it's becoming too large of an issue to go. You have, especially when it's a federal issue and states are now bringing it up, you'll have a full federal debate about it, but I don't believe you have it during a presidential election. You can have it, but I don't believe it's solved. Now, I'm one who believes you should take these issues up during an election year. Because put your ideas out there. Tax reform, healthcare reform, immigration reform. Why? Because the American public is paying attention. And what happens on election day? We make a choice. We make a choice on what we expect this country direction to go. You lay out your ideas, the other person lays out their ideas, the American public makes a decision. You know what that tells elected officials? That's where the public decided to go. So it's easier to achieve it. You know, I watched George Bush get reelected on national security, right? And then he said we needed to do something about Social Security. And the rest of the country said, whoa, when did we debate that? It's better to have the debate. That's why when you look at our budget, when we brought up Medicare, we laid our ideas out there. Others didn't even produce something. But Washington's the only place that you get rewarded for doing nothing. And it's the wrong avenue to do. Put the ideas out there, have the American public in a debate, and let's have the decision at the end.
Thank you. One more question for you. Two-part question. First of all, you're the majority whip. How are you going to define your success in 2012? And secondly, beyond the role that you currently have, which is very, very important, as Steve mentioned, how do you view what you're doing now in terms of what would you like to do long-term in terms of your overall career in politics?
How do I define success? Mm-hmm. That we're in the majority in 2013.
Okay.
No, I think.
So election day.
I think from a whip perspective is, my job is educating voters and moving something on the floor. I crafted this little thing called the Pledge to America. I'm a firm believer in structure dictates behavior. How the floor is run, I wanted to be different than when I was there. We never even had a appropriates bills up. We weren't able ever to offer an amendment. We just went through the appropriate process that this is inside baseball, but it's important. It was wide open. Any member can offer any amendment. That's unheard of back there. Before you have to go to Rules Committee offer, and then the majority says no to everything. I like to, if my idea is strong enough, it could sustain the vote of the floor. That the floor runs in an open process, that we go back to the structure of where it was created to be. So we're not all the way there yet, and really my success would be if we get there. And I may have a loss or two on the floor, but that's the way the structure is built to happen. I would actually think that was success. Because the bill, when Republicans controlled all, nothing even got vetoed. So something had to pass just because a Republican offered. Same thing with the Democrats. That's not right. Sustain itself. If it doesn't make it, that's success too, because it wasn't worthy. Let it collapse. Have the committee structure work, but have it collapse if it doesn't do well. Your second part of your question,
What are your long-term goals in politics?
I never planned that long. This is further than my folks ever thought I would make it in life. I look at elected officials, and I have these different philosophies, but elected officials that, and I see it here more so because of term limits. I'd serve with people, and the minute they got in, they were running for the Senate. And somebody else wanted to run statewide. And you know what they did? They put themselves in a box. And they were afraid to get outside the box because they were running for this position. Well, you don't achieve anything. It's just like in my first job, I sorted bottles. You know, I made $11.27 that day, and it's 102 degrees, and I return bottles. But I knew if I was the best bottle server, I could actually work on the inside market. So whatever job you're given, do it beyond expectations, and there'll be something else for you. I do not believe Congress defines me in the end.
What do you mean by that?
I see a lot of people that serve their whole life and think this is everything there is. When I see members that the only friends they have in life are elected other officials, that's not healthy, right? I really think, like everybody else in life, at the beginning when my wife and I get it, it's like what we become. Then when you have children and your children get it, it's what your children become. That's really what I think I'm going to be scored upon. I mean, I don't see myself doing this forever. I make a point of going up and down California, but I don't know, maybe I teach college. I started my first business at 20. I love to be an entrepreneur. I think I've run some things in the future, but I don't think this defines me.
Let me just say that we really appreciate what you're doing for California and continue to do when you were here working in the Assembly, as you are in Congress now, and we're glad that we've got a very clear, consistent, strong voice that understands the issues of California and really puts a lot of good thought behind the positions that you take, and we really appreciate that. And I especially appreciate, Kevin, the fact that you've come here today. You're very busy, I know that, and shared with all of us what so often I hear when I meet with you in Washington, which is really good, clear, consistent thinking about public policy issues. And can we give a hand to Kevin for this today? Thank you.